Hi, this is Michael Uslan. You're listening to Batman on Film.
I'm vengeance.
I have given a name to my pain.
The Batman.
Always waiting for some Batman to save you.
It's simple. We kill the Bat of Gotham. I'm Batman.
Hello, Bat Family, and welcome to this episode, number 179 of the Batman on Film podcast. BOF is the sponsor and a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network. Check out all of the shows over at batmanpodcastnetwork.com and follow us on Twitter at BatPodNetwork. I'm Garret Grev. Thank you for listening. Well, we're back. We've got another episode. I'm super excited about it, and I'm excited about it for a number of different reasons. Let me get to sort of like the key subject matter that I think is really enthralling here. There is a comic book that's been being published over the last few months, and I think it's lights out, dynamite, great stuff. It's by an author that can be divisive at times among Batman fans. It's Mr. Tom King. Not everybody loved. Yes, Tom King. He's very good. He wins many awards. You're probably familiar with his work on other characters. Mr. Miracle in particular, people are just batty about, so to speak. Not everybody loved his run on Batman, but that came to an end. Luckily, he is back with a new story to tell, sort of coming on the heels of that story, Batman, Catwoman. Yes, the romance continues. It's on the Black Label now. We're going to take a look at the first 3 issues that have been released. We're also going to get into some news, lots of news items. We want to talk about Batman, Catwoman, but we are recording this podcast on Thursday. And just last night, the series premiere of Superman and Lois was on the CW. And oh boy, it's going to be tough to kind of hold back that conversation from taking up a bit more of the podcast than planned on. By now, you're probably asking, well, conversation, Garret, are you just talking to yourself? No. That would be unwise. The other reason I'm very excited about this show, I have 2 new guests on the podcast appearing since I've, sort of been behind the microphone here. One you will be very familiar with, has been on many episodes of the Batman on Film podcast before. He is 50% out of the Straight Outta Gotham podcast. He, depending on when you listen to that show, and I'm sure you do, is the champion of so many different feats of incredible athleticism, from, eating competitions to swimming across rivers, and I can't keep up with it all. And he is, I think, Mr. New York. If he wasn't, if Spider-Man wasn't known for it, you just know Mr. Eric Holzmann for this. So welcome to the show, Eric. Welcome back, man.
Oh, thank you for that glorious introduction. I very, very much appreciate that. Yeah, man, since you've been kind of the head guy in charge, I haven't been on, so this is going to be fun to come back. I haven't done a Batman on Film podcast since we started Straight Outta Gotham, so this is actually a kind of going back home for me in a sense. So
yeah,
this should be fun.
Who says you can't go home?
Right.
It's comfy, it's pleasant, it's welcoming. And I tell you what, when I started thinking about when Bill had asked me to kind of slide behind the microphone, I started thinking about like, okay, first few episodes, because I've hosted podcasts before, right? Like that's not a problem. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, this is sort of a big deal, right? I listened to Batman on Film podcast since I was a wee lad. This is a big deal. Who would be sort of like my safety blankets and like all the guys I used to record with when I didn't have to put together the notes and kind of move the conversation along. So I've been waiting to get you on here, man. Thanks for joining.
Oh no, definitely. This is fun. And as you said, as everybody knows, I'm not the biggest comic book reader, but this series, Pete got me to start reading it. and I actually love it. So I'm glad we're talking about Batman Catwoman. So it
Well,
should be
I
fun.
was strategic in my thoughts around that, and I'm glad you brought it up because I thought it would be great to have somebody who is not, sort of the ardent comic book reader paired up with who else but the sort of man who has been given the charge of covering this book for the website. He is the BOF contributor. He is a 007 super fan, and he is the BOF resident Batman RIP apologist. That's Mr. Javi Trujillo. Welcome to the show, Javi.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a true honor to be here after all these years of listening and following along with BOF since its inception, basically. So it is a true privilege to be here talking with you gentlemen today.
Well, I know the feeling. It's one that I experienced, just a few years ago when I got to start showing up on the podcast, and I was like welling with pride. It was almost like if anybody saw me that first day, I think Eric, it was me, you, and Justin the first time I was ever on a show. BOF
Was it
alumni.
Titans?
Yeah, I think it was. We were talking Titans.
Yeah.
BOF alumni Justin Kowalski, currently of the Let's Go podcast network. I was like welling up with emotion. You guys couldn't see me in the basement because I literally have been, reading BOF since I was a teenage boy and listening to the podcast through all the different iterations. So it's always fun, man. I've been looking forward to getting you on here. I wasn't sure if we were going to have you on talking about your many, many toys for the listeners, right? This is a audio medium that you have. We're recording with some video, and I'm looking at a pretty impressive collection here just behind Javi. So we might have to have you. I was thinking about doing sort of a toy box centric episode with you and Peter on at some point. Would be a lot of fun. But welcome. I can't wait to talk about Batman Catwoman. I've been dying to talk about this book.
Those are my fiance's and my Funko Pop collection. So they're pretty big, but for luck, video or audio.
Love it.
No, I've got the Hot Toys Batman Returns Michael Keaton right off to the side of the computer, just to kind of be my spirit animal as I get to talk Batman with you fine gentlemen.
That's a good looking figure, man. It's lovely that you and your special someone get to share in that. I have a very large collection of Masters of the Universe action figures from the 1980s.
Nice.
My wife does not share in my enthusiasm. It is a frequent topic of contention or contentious conversation in our household. They're all right now in the garage in a set of drawers and in some bins. I need to do some pruning. Purging is the wrong word. I'm going to carefully move through and let some other people get some enjoyment out of these figures that I love so much. That's really cool that you guys can share that appreciation together.
She's actually got a She-Ra pop right over my head.
Now you're talking my language, man. Well, I don't want to get thrown off. The listeners didn't tune in to hear me talk about Masters of the Universe and the Princess of Power.
That's our show. We do the tangents on our show. You can't.
That's why I love showing up on all the podcasts that the Bat Boys have developed over the last few years. I love showing up and getting to talk on those because this one I try to stay a bit focused. It doesn't always work, but on those I'm like, hey, let's just get wild. All right, guys. So we are going to cover some news. We got some fun stuff that's happening in sort of the DC-centric geek world there. We are going to play, it's the Bat trivia game, Sweeping the Nation. You wouldn't believe, the emails and the tweets, just people demand more of the one and only game, What Are You? And then we are going to get into the main event, the issues 1 through 3 recap / discussion of Batman Catwoman. And with that, guys, let's get into the news.
3, 2, 1.
Cue music. Cue Becky.
Good evening.
I was not expecting this bit of news, but the Flash, upcoming Flash movie directed by Andy Muschietti, the cast is expanding all the time. With the characters from the DC world that are going to be in it, some of which we knew, some of which we are continuing to learn and evolve. Well, there's a huge announcement, and over on his Instagram page, the director of The Flash had a little Zoom call where he announced we have a brand new Supergirl. I mean, my mind was blown. Guys, I know you had a chance to talk about this on a recent edition of Straight Outta Gotham. Maybe give me the sound bites of, what the takeaways were, and if you first of all saw this coming, and what was your response. Eric, if you wouldn't mind going first, that'd be a delight.
All right, like you said, I did not expect this news to come, and the best thing about it was how he did it, and just watching her reaction to it. I mean, every time I see that, and you see somebody who is in the beginning of their career, she's a soap opera actress, and she's getting a job to play a superhero. That's just amazing. And now she's obviously, it carries cachet, right? People know Supergirl. It has a show. She was a character. She's been a character for a long time, and obviously the CW show has raised her.
The profile's pretty high.
Exactly, yeah. So now you have this movie, and she's being cast as this character. It's just really, really awesome. I really hope she does a great job, and I'm just looking forward to it. This, again, not expected. That cast just keeps growing and growing, so this movie is becoming more and more of a behemoth of a film.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone is handled great and correctly, and they do a good job giving everyone equal time in the film. But yeah, as far as this casting, good job. I mean, she clearly was overjoyed getting the part, so I have no doubt she's going to kill it in the role.
Man, that always warms my heart the most when you see these actors, and maybe they've had some success and are looking to bring their career to the next level, and you see the emotion. It's just like draft day, man. I mean, we always end up talking a little bit of football or weather on Batman on Film podcast. Again, when you watch these college athletes go and they get drafted and they've made it to the league and they're overcome with emotion, like, I just love it so much. It really kind of warms the heart. Javi, what were your thoughts, man? Anything immediately popped to mind for you? Were you familiar with the actress already, by the way, Sasha Calle?
No, I am not a Young and the Restless viewer. My fiance is more of a not guiding light, General Hospital fan. So I wasn't familiar with her. And I'm a big fan of Melissa Benoist. I think she's pitch perfect as Supergirl.
Yeah.
But watching that video of her getting the role, I mean, it's impossible to not fall in love with her.
Right.
Just as a person. And I'm over the moon excited for her that this has come into her life. And like I said, I'm not familiar with her work at all, but I know that she got nominated for the Daytime Emmy last year. So clearly she's got some talent. She beat out 400 other people for the role. So now I'm just excited to see what version of Supergirl she is. Is she going to be Kara? Is she going to be Matrix Supergirl, or Sirel maybe?
Sirel is
like the early 2000s.
Right. The Ed McGuinness, Superman, Batman, kind of second, third run on that book. I know they weren't the creators, but I think that's where I remember her the most.
Yeah, it's like the Superman 10-cent adventure, I think, was where she first popped up. But is this a 5-minute part where they briefly visit one of the Earths in the multiverse, or does she have like a more substantial role? I mean, we don't know any of this yet, and that's part of the fun of the production process, is getting these little morsels fed as the months go on. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes next.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting because you brought up I'm sorry, I couldn't remember, Javi, if it was you or Eric brought up the 400 other actresses that had auditioned that she beat out. That, to me at least, lends to the idea that maybe it's more than just running through one multiverse and then here's a quick flash of that world's Supergirl. It feels like that's a whole heck of a lot of actresses to audition to pick one. So maybe that speaks to a larger part. Maybe it's a larger part in the future, but not necessarily in this movie. We just don't know. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think we discussed that a little last night, like what's going to happen going forward with the character. And I do agree with you. I do think we're going to get a movie, probably a standalone Supergirl movie sometime down the road, as DC continues to expand in their multiverse, in their new multiverse that they're showing us. So,
absolutely.
And the last Supergirl movie was 1984.
Yeah.
And my recollection of it was I didn't care for it. And I've always wanted to go back and revisit it because the director wound up doing a bunch of Smallville. and episodes that I liked of Smallville. So I always wanted to go back and check it out. I just haven't carved out that time. And I know it's on HBO Max. So
I was going to say available on HBO Max. I haven't gone back to revisit it. I remember even as a kid being like, oh, this is not as good as the Superman movies. I should like this more than I do.
Yeah, it's very dated too. Like that one, the Superman movies kind of hold up a little bit, but obviously not the cars and the stuff. Obviously, that's very much a dated thing. But the story, I remember Supergirl. I want to say I went back to watch it like 5-6 years ago, and it didn't hold. I never liked it to begin with, but it really didn't get any better with age. So
yeah, I know one thing that we don't always touch a lot on, because it feels like, kind of feeding the wrong element. But it would be sort of remiss to not mention that this is a Latina actress that's been cast as Supergirl, a traditional, very Caucasian, very blonde alien.
Yes.
But DC is I think DC Pictures is doing a nice job with diversity and representation. Which just allows, I think, in some ways, whether it should or not, a broader audience to find these characters than may have otherwise. And I don't think that's true all the time, but it's certainly not a hindrance. You look at what, diverse characters and representation and actors did for movies like Fast and the Furious. The more they went along and the more representation they had in their cast. These things are hits internationally. They're big hits in South America. They're big hits all over the globe, instead of just, catering to what the dominant population might look like, in my neck of woods in Minnesota. So it is something we haven't seen before, and it is noteworthy. And I think it's something that should be applauded. There's room for different takes on these characters. And that means that, actors, regardless of maybe looking just like what the character looks like on the page, can show up and have a chance. And if that can boost audience, then that's awesome. That's great for the characters.
No, it's a really good point you bring up. The movie box office landscape has changed so much in the last decade, and studios aren't just looking to see how they performed domestically in the US. They're looking at that global picture, and something that necessarily didn't do so great in America might have done gangbusters in China or Japan or in Europe. And that's getting other movies greenlit. I know Pacific Rim didn't do as much as they would have hoped in America, but in the rest of the world, it did enough that they could make a sequel. And I think it was the Wolverine that kind of had the same problem. Like it didn't gross so much based off the last few X-Men movies, but it did really, really well overseas. And then that got us Days of Future Past and Logan.
Yeah.
So
it's funny because
it's become vital.
Absolutely. And that domestic sort of worldwide split, the movie that comes to my mind all the time is Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
Because that was one that really fizzled inside the States, but it took off and found a huge audience. That's
even in the United States, I mean, even in DC's own family, Aquaman was a bigger hit globally than it was here.
Totally.
Suicide Squad, the same thing. It was a much bigger hit globally than it was in the United States. So, it's a very, very big deal. And Aquaman Jason Momoa was a Pacific Islander, right? So, you have that whole other audience you're tapping into with the guy who's leading the film. Representation is very important, and it's becoming more and more important as time goes on.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. The next one I wanted to talk about, guys, and we'll spend a little bit of time here. Superman and Lois premiered last night on the CW. Live on the CW app today, as of the date of this recording, February 24th, but the premiere was on the 23rd, is airing on HBO Max, although I tried to look for dates on that, and I wasn't able to kind of peg that down. If one of you guys have that, feel free to share it. But man, I was blown away. I'll just normally I like to throw it to the guests to give their point of view first. I can't wait to tell you guys how much I love this thing. I tweeted last night, I was watching this thing within 15 minutes. I'm like, why am I crying? I don't know why I'm crying. And, it was emotional. I thought the storytelling was really good. I thought the acting was good. I thought the production value was fantastic. You can tell it's got that HBO money backing it up and not just CW money backing it up. I thought it was a home run. So before I go too far into the episode itself, Javi, maybe you started off this time. What was your reaction to the premiere episode? First of all, I know that you watched watched it, so I could act like, hey, did you watch it? I know you did. What'd you think, man? What were the highlights for you?
Well, I remember in 1994 watching Lois and Clark and not being being a very casual Superman fan, and seeing that show and how they depicted that interpretation that it was Clark was who he was and Superman is what he could do, and like that aspect, that interpretation of the character hooked me in. And so when Smallville came out, I was there day one, watching all 10 years of it. So of course with Superman and Lois, it's like, all right, it's been 20 years. I got to be in on this. And I spent most of the day and the day before just kind of catching up a little bit, going through like the 2-part debut in Supergirl of Superman, and skipping around Elseworlds and watching a bit of Crisis, just to kind of freshen myself for almost a big screen debut. So when the pilot started, I was just blown away, just like you guys were. It looked completely different than anything we've seen on the CW before, and that's not just the aspect ratio that it aired in. The music was different. It was more rich. It was more full. And just the way that Hecklin portrayed Clark and Superman was different than what we've seen prior.
Oh my gosh.
So by the time we got to that first act break, I mean, I was like tearing up at moments too. There's
Right?
there's such a humanity that comes out in that show, and it's something we've never seen before with Superman. We haven't really seen him be having to deal with being a father and having the same issues as everyone else. You know,
Oh,
having
man.
trouble relating to his kids, and having money worries and job worries. And there's a lot of people that say that Superman doesn't work in the modern era, but I think they kind of proved that he does last night.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And Javi, to your point, when I turn it on, the thing you can see some of the previews and the stills that were released, and oh man, this costume looks great. It's a clear upgrade from, in my opinion, from what they had on Supergirl. So some of that I was sort of expecting, even from a color grading standpoint, a lighting standpoint, and cinematography, you can kind of get a feel for some of that, all of which I think were a big upgrade. What I was not prepared for was Tyler, give me the pronunciation one more time. Hecklin?
Hecklin.
Yeah, I was not prepared for the vast difference in how he portrayed Clark. And I thought he was much more regal without being distant as Superman than what I saw in Supergirl. I was not expecting that. I was really impressed. If anything, my worry going into Superman and Lois was, his Clark gets on my nerves a bit. And I'm not a Supergirl diehard. I basically checked out those episodes and crossovers. But what I saw was so much more real and human and grounded. I thought the work he did was really well, in a couple key emotional beats that I can wait to get into before. I want Eric, you to share your thoughts first before we move too much further along.
Well, first of all, I'll tell you that they won't be on HBO Max until after the season wraps on the CW. So that'll be the first time you can see it. There a release date that hasn't been announced. Hasn't been announced yet, but that's when we'll see it. Yeah, I was, as everyone knows, if you listen straight out of Gotham, you've heard me before. I kind of abandoned the CW shows a few years ago. I watched Arrow all the way through. That was the one I liked from beginning to end. It had some rough seasons, but still, it's the one I stuck with. The other shows have just kind of fallen off for me. So when I was seeing the promos for Superman and Lois, and I was hearing about it, and like you, Garrett, the times I saw Tyler Hecklin play Superman, I wasn't super impressed. So I was kind of iffy about it, but the trailers were really doing a good job of pulling me in, right? I'm watching, I'm like, all right, this is probably gonna be better than I think. And it really was. I can't even say, I did not expect that kind of quality from the show. And it was just well acted. He was a completely different character. Like that Superman, I don't know if they took notes and listened to people who were complaining about him on the other shows, because it was completely different. He always seems so like off and I don't know, aloof on the other shows, very much just kind of a throw in to it. He wasn't like the guy, so he's kind of like a throw in every time you saw him in a crossover or whatever. Nico Caruso said something great last night. Like when they did the end of Crisis, they showed all of them, and Superman was like 7th, like all the way.
Yeah.
You know, like you're talking about Superman, and he's being pushed behind all these other characters. And I understand that's the way they built the universe in the CW, so that's the way they did it. But still, man, everything about this show, it hits on a there's enough action. There was enough action in it to keep you interested. You had the family. Family was the theme throughout the whole thing. It wasn't just with Superman and Lois. We also got sight of Lana and her family. Like we had all these other elements there to the show, and it pulled me in. And the best thing a pilot can do is want you to come back for the second episode. And I think it accomplished that. So
yeah, I agree with you entirely. And audiences agreed. So they had had the largest, most successful viewership at that time slot in over 2 years. 1.6 million viewers tuning in live to the CW. That's big numbers for that network. And in a rating, it was A- was the overall sort of, it's not cinema score, but whatever that is for television. And 90% of those viewers said they would be tuning in at the regular time next week when it moves into its regular slot. One of the best things I think a TV show can do, especially a spinoff, and especially a program that is taking a new approach or telling a new sort of slant to existing characters, is make me not hate the new elements. And besides heckling and being like, I don't like that Clark too much, the other piece that I was maybe a bit concerned about was, how am I going to feel about these boys, right? Jonathan and Jordan. Yeah. I was nervous about that. I'm like, if they're bratty, angsty kids, and oh man, they're going to push back against their dad, the Square, until they find out he's Superman. Like that just felt like it was going to be a cheese fest for me. And if they play it up too much where these are brats, then I don't like bratty kids, man. Sometimes my kids act bratty. I don't want to watch bratty kids on TV. But I thought they handled it really well, right? Sort of like emo kid that, was going through some stuff a couple times. I'm like, all right, dial it back a little bit, partner. And then sort of like meathead football brother. I was like, all right, buddy, just, cool it down just a hair. But they never got over the top for me. And I actually want to see their story progress. And I want to see the story of, I'm going to blank on the name. I do this at least once an episode. I start talking about something I don't have in front of me. Lana Lang's, Lana's daughter. I'm really actually interested to see what happens with these kids going forward. And I was not expecting to have any interest in that sort of like subplot. No one needs to have the name. But,
I was going to say, is it Sarah?
Sarah sounds right. Sarah sounds right. Tweet at us if we're wrong. That's fine. But what did you guys think about the additional element of the kids?
Go ahead, Javi.
Sophie.
That's her name. It started with S.
The kids I was concerned about, but probably in a different way than you are or were. When Superman Rebirth happened, however many years ago that was now, 3 or 4 years ago, they introduced Jonathan Kent as the son of Clark and Lois from the pre-Flashpoint universe that got stuck on this convergence world that allowed them to conceive a child. And he was delivered by Flashpoint Thomas Wayne Batman. If that's not confusing.
It's a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
A whole lot of stuff. I feel like every time we get into this, it's the famous gif of Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with the strings. I think it's the male episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So when they relaunched Action and Superman with the Super Family, Jonathan was a little bit older than he was seen in the Lois and Clark series, and he was about 10. And they actually moved to a farm. It wasn't in Smallville. I forget the name of the town now, where they kind of had to go back and forth from, their place in the country to Metropolis to work. And Pete Tomasi, Dan Jurgens, and all the artists that worked with them, they just did a phenomenal job creating this family unit and telling these stories. that, I mean, it's one of my favorite eras of Superman already. And my son, who was about John's age, a little bit older at the time, Superman's his favorite superhero, not Batman. And so this character means a lot to him. Just so to see it come to TV, and now he's split between Jonathan and Jordan. And Jordan looks like the Jonathan from the comics, but none of them really act like the Jonathan from the comics. And now the Jonathan in the comics went with Jor-El, who's not really dead, on a space adventure, and they got stuck in a time bubble. So he came back, and he's like 17 now.
Oh man!
Yeah.
Every time Superman has something going good, I'm always like, just watch. They're going to do too much. They're going to do too much. They're going to take it too far. I promise you, this is what they do.
So because my son is such a fan, like I was worried for him that, you know, he wasn't going to like it. But I think, and he hasn't watched it yet, but I think when he does see it, that they're good characters, and there's some interesting stuff I think we're going to see in the next, 14 episodes, and how they deal with a dad who's the world's greatest hero, and how that's messed with their upbringing.
Yeah, it's going to be
a lot of trust issues they're going to have to work through.
There's going to be a lot of stuff to work through. Hopefully it leaves the series ripe for new stories to tell, because if they can keep up with the quality of the pilot, which sometimes is really difficult, right? But also sometimes you have a series where the pilot is very clearly the television show finding its voice and figuring out who it's going to be when it grows up, and it sort of does that in the first season. I like the limited series run. Not trying to fit 26 episodes of story here, I think is a benefit. You can kind of condense the quality, but so far so good, right? Great start. It sounds like we all enjoyed it, and continue to check out Superman and Lois on the CW. I don't think you're going to regret it if you do. But there are other superheroes out there. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is also doing their thing, and what happens in this sort of dynamic in storied friendly competition between the two titans in the industry. When one company has a big hit or a big day on their hand, what happens the next day? Well, in this case, Marvel comes out and announces the title for Spider-Man 3 and the launch date for the new Loki series on Disney Plus. Javi, do you think that this is just a coincidence, or do you think those dastardly devils over at Marvel really have this in their back pocket, ready to rain on DC's parade?
No, I think it's all part of the plan.
I do too.
There's too many coincidences. It's not just this one incident. The fact that Falcon and Winter Soldier comes out the day after the Snyder Cut.
Oh, that one too. Good point.
At one point, Civil War and BVS were coming out on the same day.
Yep.
That's right.
And there's just a whole bunch of other little things. It's like maybe it was Daredevil. Did Daredevil come out like the week that BVS came out?
It did. It premiered the week that BVS was in theaters. It was Monday, Thursday before a Good Friday launch of 2016. I remember it very well, clearly.
So this has been going on for at least 5 years, and if not counting just the publishing side of things, where DC had the Doom Patrol, and now Marvel's got X-Men, and DC's got the Justice League, and now Marvel has the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been going on for a while. It's just funny. It's like DC can't catch a break. They seem to be coming out as the underdogs a lot of the times with the juggernaut that is the MCU.
How tides have changed, right? If you go back to the late 90s, even Marvel was in bankruptcy. They were selling off their characters left, right, and center. You had some really B-grade movies get produced, and then it's not really that long, right? It's 20 years, but to go from being on ready to shutter the windows and close the doors to what's happened is pretty incredible. And DC has the characters and the stories to even soar beyond that. I still believe that to be true, and they're going to be trying to soar beyond it. Who loves a good relaunch more than DC Comics? Nobody at all. Death Metal and then Future State draw to a close. The last bit of news I wanted to just touch on briefly before we keep the show moving was DC Infinite Frontier. So DC Infinite Frontier is, basically DC saying, what is continuity to us? And DC looks in the mirror and says, it's everything. But not in like very tightly connected continuity where things tell a singular story and never get goofy or wonky as everything. No. DC's coming out and saying everything is everything. It's almost the Grant Morrison approach to DC continuity. And Infinite Frontier is going to be kicking off with a issue 0 in the near future. Everything headed up by Joshua Williamson, who has a history, a long tenured career in the Flash. Also wrote the majority of the most recent volume of Batman Superman. And he's kind of saying everything happened and everything is possible is the mantra. Eric, you're open about this. You're not the most habitual comic book reader. Mm-hmm. When you hear this, how does the news land for you? What's the impact in the way you think about comic book reading, or maybe your desire to start reading more comic books?
Well, I remember when Future State was announced, I said I was going to read Future State, and I've read all the Batman stuff pretty much, and anything tied to Gotham City. So I've read all of that, and I've enjoyed it. So I know it sounds like Infinite Frontier is going to be adding to the continuity of some of the things that came prior to it. It's not like a brand new thing like like Future State was. So I think that it's something that I'm interested in because I read a little bit about what they're doing with Batman and Joker, and that sounds interesting. I know that it's a Joker solo book, which I remember talking about it with Pete, and he was like on SOG, and he was like, well, that doesn't interest me. I know Garret, I know you said before we came on air, it doesn't interest you. Yeah. For someone like me who doesn't read a lot of the content, I'm kind of interested to see what they do with it. It sounds interesting. They're talking about Gordon being the protagonist, and it's kind of like this Silence of the Lambs type thing maybe going on. So I'm looking forward to something new that I could dig my teeth into maybe and start more fresh than I would have to read something that's been going on forever and ever.
That's cool. And I think that's probably what DC's looking for. It feels like, Eric, you said something that was interesting. It's opening things up. I think in previous events, Crisis on Infinite Earth is, sort of the go-to example. It was about stripping stuff away and erasing things. This feels much, much different than that. Just saying like, it all happened. Like, maybe don't worry about it so much. Like, it's just chill out. Everything's cool. Quit being such a geek about it. Javi, is that the feel you're getting from this man, or what's your take?
Yeah, it's them trying to say that everything counts and just saying, just go with it. At the end of Death Metal, the thing happens. Try not to be too spoilery.
Sure.
At the end, we find out that, after all the universes that were destroyed, everything got recreated pretty much back to where it was, except now we've got a DC Omniverse, and they've got a Justice League that's a league over all of that, and they're going to be patrolling the different aspects of the multiverse. And so that leads into next week's Future State 0, which is kind of give us a brief tour of what we're going to be getting over the course of the next year and into the future. The problem with it, if it is a problem, I read an article on Newsarama, 2 articles on Newsarama, where they kind of let the cat out of the bag about what's going on with Infinite Frontier. And it's not that we're getting a multiverse, or now what they're calling an omniverse. We're getting a linear verse. So you need to go down to your comic shops next week, and you need to get Generations Forged this week, which touches on it at the end, and that leads into Infinite Frontier, where basically the Superman that you've read since 38, and the Batman since 39, and the Wonder Woman since 41, like everything happened to them. It's just that time now is stretched out. There's a linear verse. So while for us, it's the time that we have, for them, they're so important and vital that the passage of time is slower for them. So it lets DC kind of just pick and choose. So if it's an Elseworlds, it's part of the multiverse. you can assume time just does whatever. But for the main DC line, they all seem to take place in this linear verse. So you can have Barry and Wally and Dick, Jason, Tim, they weren't just interns for a brief couple of months. Like all this stuff really did happen.
Yeah,
It's
which is
over a really long timeline.
And I think, I've picked on the New 52 here and other places. And the thing that, the best thing about the New 52 is always Batman. But even with Batman, you sort of had all of Batman's history almost condensed into what I think was a 5-year period.
Yeah.
Where, Dick was there, Jason was there for Jason had to be on the job 2 damn days before he took a crowbar to the noggin. There's just no time. So you sort of, it's comic books, right? There's suspension of disbelief. But if you're going to make it a thing, you got to play by your own rules. And that felt silly to me. So this really does feel like DC is, I haven't read those articles, Javi. Thank you for mentioning those. Maybe even I can find those and link those out. But it kind of feels like DC's way to have their cake and eat it too. And it sounds tasty enough. I'm going to be tuning in, or I should say digitally clicking on the pages until I can find a new local comic book shop to get back in my world of physical copies, which I prefer. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the news. Let's play a quick game of What Are You, and then leave us a bit of time to talk Batman and Catwoman. On to the game.
Oh, boy.
I'd like you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
All right, so, guys, the listeners all know the rules, right? This, like I said, it's very, very popular. This is the biggest thing. But you're both new, so I'm going to revisit them just a little bit. What I am going to do, I've selected a Batman-ish thing, okay? I'm going to give you 3 clues. These are kind of your standard clues. Maybe they'll lead you to guess what the thing is. Maybe they won't. But they each will build on each other in some ways. If at any point during these 3 clues you have the answer, listener, this is where I've taken my bat oath of honesty. You can't see them, but I'm holding the fort down here. You raise your hand. The person who has not raised their hand, you have the opportunity to guess at that point or to hear another clue. Whoever is able to guess the what are you correctly first wins, and then you get all the cool pride and you can brag about on Twitter or whatever, because I haven't thought through an actual prize. We're working on a budget here. So is that clear enough, guys? Are you ready to start?
Can we get a beer or something? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I will buy you a beer at the next watch party that we all end up at. That is a guarantee.
Okay.
We'll see how many episodes happen between now and then, though. I might be buying a lot of beers now that I said that out loud. 1 beer per person. Okay, so this is a give me. What are you? I am a Batman theatrical movie. Okay, you guys ready? What are you? Clue number 1. I was released in the 1990s, and I had the lowest budget of any theatrical Batman movie. Okay? Clue number 2. I am certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with a 85% score. What are you? Moving on to clue number 3. Dear friend of the show, producer extraordinaire, I call him dear friend. I don't know him. Editor-in-chief Bill knows him very well. But Mr. Michael Uslan has said, is possibly the best Batman movie ever made. What are you? All right, these are the 3 standard clues. This is the 4th. This is the giveaway. If you don't get it here, you're not Batman. You might not even be Robin. You might be Harold or Batmite. Clue number 4. It was nominated for a major award, along with The Lion King in The Nightmare Before Christmas, but it lost to The Lion King. What are you? You have your answers written down, okay? So, yeah. Javi, you put your hand up first. Eric, you went all the way to the end. You get to guess first. Eric, what did you have?
Batman Returns.
You are incorrect. Javi, tell this man what the movie is.
It's very on point. It's Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Because
it got a theatrical release and being animated had the lowest budget out of any movie.
Oh, yes.
You are absolutely...
As soon as I said it. Oh, yes.
You are absolutely right. And the major award that it was nominated for was the Annie Award for Best Animated Motion Picture, and it lost to The Lion King.
It was robbed.
It was robbed.
Seen
That
Master
last
of the
clue should have
Phantasm
given it to me.
way
I'm an
more
idiot.
than Lion King.
All right, gang. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for playing What Are You? Javi,
I'm
congratulations. And let's get into the main event.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
All right. Well, there's a reason why I asked both these gentlemen on the podcast. Javi, as you, dear listener, may know, is reviewing the series for Batman on Film and is a pretty avid comic book reader. Eric, as we've said before, doesn't read a ton of comic books, but has been reading this one. Why? Because it's a major event. I have been reading this because I read comics and I love Batman stuff. And I think Tom King is really interesting, and I'll touch on that more as we go. So I thought the three of us could give us a pretty good spectrum of readers to be able to tell you about this. But the man of the hour here is Javi. Javi, if you would be so kind, I would love for you to set the stage for us and for the listener on, what this series is, first of all, and then maybe we'll get into just a little bit of where we are to this point. We're at the quarter mark of the series, right? So if we were running a mile in gym class as kids, we would be at that first lap, dreading that there are 3 more to go. In this case, I'm not dreading the last 3/4. So I'm really eager for them. But Javi, give us the overview to start.
I think you have to go back to the beginning, which in this case would be Batman Rebirth #1. King's had an initial plan for like 100 issues of Batman. And through it all, we get Gotham Girl, I am Suicide, I am Bane. You have Batman going to Santa Prisca. You have Catwoman possibly being a murderer of hundreds of people. You have the War of Jokes and Riddles, all these things. And through it all, there's a through line of a romance between Batman and Catwoman. And almost in the Frank Miller-like sense, they kind of go a little film noir. And Selina calls Bruce Bat, and he calls her Cat. And we see
again,
and we see this relationship blossom over the course of his series. And to me, that was my favorite part of his run. There's a few misses in his run, but his Batman Catwoman stuff was always the strongest. If you look at like Super Friends, it's a 2-issue arc done art by Clayman. That's Lois and Clark and Bruce and Selina basically on a date after they get engaged. And it's just pure character stuff. So during the course of this run, he does an annual #2, and we kind of go through the whole relationship. And there's always the argument too, which kind of ties into the linear verse. Batman says that they met on a boat, referencing Batman #1. Catwoman says, no, we met in the street, referencing Batman Year One. And they argue about this for all their lives. And in this annual, we kind of get the whole overview of the relationship, of how they met when they were young and kind of how they courted. And then we see them finally married and old, and that they have a daughter, Helena, who wears a Batwoman suit very similar to Kate Kane's. It's black and red. And finally, at the end of it, Bruce passes away in bed, surrounded by the Bat family. And Selina goes to the cave and sees like a little trinket, a little cat trinket, and a note from Bruce. And then from there, we have more stuff with Batman and his Flashpoint father. Alfred gets killed. Spoilers for that if you haven't been
paying attention for a while.
And there was a big thing going on about Tom King where he had to get permission from AT&T to do something. I always assumed that it was the wedding, which they were supposed to get married in 50. They made a big deal. My comic shop was open at midnight and had wedding cake. And at the end of that issue, they don't get married, and Catwoman goes off into her own series. So this Batman Catwoman miniseries is supposed to be the culmination of his run. And it turns out, due to the powers that be, maybe it was DiDio leaving, I'm not really sure what the behind the scenes machinations were, but now it's a out of continuity Black Label series, but it's supposed to be kind of like the culmination of his run. What his real finale would have been if we're not going into what was going to be Future State and now is going to be part of the Infinite Frontier.
Yeah, I mean, Javi, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, that was you set the stage beautifully.
Yep.
Because you're right. If you try to get into just this book, and I think there's standalone reading value here. If a reader wanted to pick this series up and didn't go through all the King, that whole run of Batman following Rebirth, you could do it, and it's a worthy read, very worthy read, and the art's gorgeous. We can talk about the art more as we go along, but it is all the richer if you understand, what the sort of prologue to this is, and that was just really wonderfully explained. So thank you for that, Eric. I wanted to ask you. I know you read a bit of the King's Run. I don't think you read the whole thing, if I remember when we talked about this before. I wanted to ask you if as you're reading through this, it's non-linear storytelling, big time. You're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Was any of that confusing, or did it throw you off at all, thinking it might be referencing specifics that happened in a run that you hadn't read, or were you able to flow with it as it went?
It was confusing at first. It's starting to make more sense of the further the issues go. I'm starting to understand it more. But Javi's explanation now just really helped put a lot of it in perspective for me. That was great. So it definitely was confusing at first. There's time jumping in it, and I'm not sure what time I'm really in at the moment I'm reading it. It was very confusing. But I just said at one point, I'm like, you know what, Eric, just screw all that. Don't worry about it. Just read it and see what you think. So I do, like you said, I do think there's value if you do know about King's Run before. And even though, as Javi said, this now technically isn't part of that, it kind of feels like it after his explanation.
Yeah, it for sure is the spiritual successor. And I the reason why I ask is because the book to this point, at least through 3 issues, and maybe more comes of it, isn't necessarily the annual hobby that you brought up is a great point, but it hasn't really referenced specific key elements of King's Run outside of maybe Alfred having passed away. But it doesn't speak to, he got killed like this and Bane was going nuts and blah, blah, blah. But it is sort of, I said kind of spiritual successor. I think it's maybe a bit more closely tied to that. But I feel like one of the things that King has done really well to this point is almost allowed there to be some breathing room between his run on the flagship title and this, where it is similar enough that you have a deeper level of appreciation if you know what it was born out of, but it isn't so dependent on it. And sometimes creators fail at that. When you're a storyteller, when you're a writer, these are your babies, these are your children in some ways. And sometimes it's hard to move past them. And you just sort of keep connecting back to the same stuff in a way that fails the new. Javi, is, having read, King's Run on the flagship and now this, are you experiencing that the same way? Or is the connective tissue tighter than what I'm describing it for you?
I think you can get into it. I think there's enough there that if you've read the comics or watched some of the cartoons, you'll appreciate some of the things. There's a moment where Selena visits a certain character, before we get too spoilery, that references the events of Batman 48 and 49.
Yeah.
So it's a richer experience if you've read that, but I don't think it hurts it in the long run. It doesn't hurt reading Batman Catwoman if you haven't seen the animated series episode The Underdwellers, which deals with the Sewer King. I mean, it's a fun nod,
absolutely,
and paying tribute to the animated series where the Phantasm comes from.
Yep.
Or the movie, but you can give it to someone like, okay, there's a weird Gotham guy in the sewers with alligators for pets. And I think you can there's enough there you can just roll with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on sort of my list of topics, what I wanted to move into, I was going to wait a little bit, but this is kind of a good transition. So much of this has the DNA of the animated series, flowing through it. It's not like the son or daughter of the animated series, but it's like a nephew or niece, maybe a great nephew or great niece or something, but it's clearly there. And sometimes, just like with relatives, there's a very key feature that's super identifiable. Like, the Grevs all have super big heads. You see any of my kids, like, look at the size of that melon on that kid. Oh, it's a Grev kid for sure. And to me, like, that's Andrea Beaumont or, the Phantasm, which Javi very smartly pointed out, in What Are You? The point of that was to, sort of inspired by what I knew what we were going to talk about. That's the most obvious one.
Yep.
But I see these smaller features that are there. Sewer King was another one that's pretty straightforward. Maybe the ears stick out a little bit. Sorry, Christian, if my kids are listening, you got that for me too. But Catwoman's costume is something that stands out to me. She's wearing a sort of I don't know if more realistic's the word for it, but a more sort of Clayman comic book style approach to the animated series costume for a certain time period, while Batman is wearing something that looks somewhat similar to the New Adventures of Batman version of the animated costume at the same time. So it's clear that, King and Man are pulling from a lot of different, bat pools of information that are influencing this, whether it's the animated series, the reference to Year One and Selina describing sort of, at least that's what I thought she was alluding to, sort of how she grew up having to make compromises. I think spoke a bit to Year One depiction of Selina and others that I wanted to ask you, Javi, do you think King would have or could have written this same book the same way if this was in continuity, or is this something that only got to come to be the way it did thanks to being a Black Label title?
I don't think so. It's so pared down from where he was going. The cast of characters is remarkably small and tight for this series.
It is. You mentioned sort of noir influences with the relationship before. The noir influences in this title, because of that tight cast. I mean, noir movies don't have these big sprawling casts, right? There's maybe 13 movie or characters in some of those movies, if that. It is tight, centralized action, and that's one thing that I think has kept it very smart. It doesn't sprawl. It might sprawl across timelines, but the character, the people that we're invested in, stays tight. Sorry, I totally interrupted you. Continue on.
I think that had it been the next issue of Batman 86 or wherever he left off, I think there would have been more ramifications of Alfred's demise, and certainly those threads got picked up elsewhere with Damian and the Teen Titans. But it feels very much a part of King's continuity, but at the same time, it feels like its own unique animal that I can't see it being part of the main book, just because it jumps around so much and it doesn't take you by the hand like you would expect a normal mainstream comic book would. You have to look for those clues. You have to look for, okay, Selina's in the black outfit, so we're in the past.
Thank you for
okay, we're in
that.
the gray outfit, now we're in the present, and some of them are even on the same page. You have Andrea mentioning Alfred and Bruce saying he's gone, and then immediately in the next panel, Alfred's alive again.
Right.
And then you have and then in the next page, Bruce is in bed with Selina, and Alfred's like, "Oh,"
like,
so like it's
breakfast for two. They say.
Yeah, it's very different in the way he tells the story, and with the transitions, which is one of the things I love about it. I can see why some people are frustrated by it, but it just gives it, for me, more entertainment value because I'm slowly dissecting everything as I read it. I feel like I'm taking my time more when I read the story. I'm not just blowing through it in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on my kid Christian more. You know, he's got the Grev head and the ears that stick out like mine. I tell him all the time, dude, he loves food so much, he races through a meal. And I'm like, did you even enjoy it? Like, slow down, chew, savor this thing. And you've got to do that with this book. There's no other way to do it. There is not even your basic, like, then, later,
no,
afterward. None of that. And for me, I love Batman things that feel like Batman. They don't always have to approach the character the same way. Skills, abilities, levels of realism, none of that is as important to me, but it has to feel like Batman. It has to give me a Batman feeling. And when I'm reading these books, I feel like I have to be a detective.
Mm-hmm.
I have to figure out, look for clues. Where am I? When am I? What am I supposed to be noticing? Who is talking here, right? Who is this old lady? Who is this old guy? Oh my gosh, why'd that old lady kill that old guy? Like, all this stuff is key detective work where I feel like, oh, am I Bruce Wayne now reading this? What a delight. I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
Eric, Javi had mentioned the costume changes being sort of a key signal post of what time line you're in. How long was that something that stood out to you right away, or was that one of the things that you said you've been learning kind of the tricks and the games and the rules of this book? At what point did that sort of start to dawn on you?
I did notice it right away in the first book. The Jokers being dressed differently. Like, you have the different ones from the three Jokers, right? You could easily say that. You have all of them here.
Yeah.
And you see them differently. I picked that up right away. And it's one of the things that when I first read this, because Pete and I discussed the first book on Straight Outta Gotham, and it was one of the things I remember bringing up, saying that, yeah, you have all these different like costume changes. I felt like I was watching like a concert where someone keeps going and changing their clothes. I had that feeling, but it keeps it it keeps you interested. It keeps you fresh. You're getting, if you know the characters, then it kind of pulls you to that time with that period with that character. So yeah, I noticed it right away, and it's great. It's a really, really, really cool thing. And like you said, it's something you have to look for. If you're just reading the words, you might not see it right away. So you really have to pay attention in this run.
Well, and I don't mean this in any way to sound snobbish at all, because I love to look at pretty pictures as much as the next person, but I tend to be a bit more literary minded. I, grew up with an English teacher for a mother. I went to school. One of my degrees is in English literature and writing. And I am sort of a word reader first. And then I have to remind myself, like, I love the art, but a lot of times on my second reading, I get to appreciate the art more, because I'm reading a comic book almost more like a novel. You cannot do that with this book. You're forced to appreciate both mediums working together. And the best comic books do that, right? Like, I'm far from the first person to say that.
Oh, yeah.
This is a great example of that happening. You said something else that made me, sorry. On Twitter today, you see these tweets, everyone likes, you get these meme tweets, everybody's saying kind of the same thing, and then people say it again and again and again. It's like, normalize this, and it gets 1 million likes. It mean normalize, whatever, talking about mental health, something that makes total sense, and then it spins off, becomes its own thing. And somebody's like, normalize comic book characters wearing multiple outfits in the books. You wear different clothes every day, they should too. And Dan Jurgens retweeted it. He's like, hell no. Let me tell you, as an artist, this is the last thing that we want to do. I'm paraphrasing. Dan probably didn't say hell. He's like as big of a Boy Scout as Superman. But I thought immediately, like, whoa, man, I can't wait to see what Clayman would say about this, because that dude's flipping back and forth all over the place. Javi, speaking of the art, I'd love to get, you do a really nice job. And for listeners that you haven't read Javi's reviews, please go check out his author page on batmanonfilm.com. You can check out all his reviews. I think I've read your reviews for quite some time. I think these are actually some of your finest that you've written.
Thank you, man. That
really risen to the challenge of reviewing this book in a really nice way. But in particular, I think you've said some very smart things about the use of Clayman's art. Clayman sounds like a different thing.
Sounds like a character. Yeah.
He's one of Tynan's new villains in Infinite Frontier.
Tynan can't stop creating new villains.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to just kind of share some of your thoughts around the artwork, because I can say, oh man, it's pretty. I think his line work's great. He really draws Selena well. I don't want to get too much into it more than that, but like you were, he does. But I thought you had some very, very astute observations of that work. I'd love for you to share some of that.
Oh man. I mean, one of the things I really liked is the way that he interprets the Joker in kind of a controversial Joker look week with Jesus Joker.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, Zack Snyder's Joker Christ. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, there's a lot of different outfits that the Joker wears. He's not in his traditional purple suit. We've got kind of like a Miami Vice look that could almost be.
That was my favorite one. It was almost like Jared Leto
Returns.
Right?
Yeah, there's one that's made of money. This is a print of dollar bills, and he's like forced into this safe. It's the creepiest splash page. It's so everything in the book is so detailed, because as we've talked about, you've got to have these clues of where we are and who's doing what, and it's telling the story through their costuming of where we're at and who they are in their lives. Because in the past, Selena's wearing a black costume, and that's where her allegiance with the Joker starts.
Right.
But in the present, she's more aligned with Batman. And so she's got gray, not only making that allusion that you mentioned to her first animated series look, but she's riding the fence. The Joker's testing her. Are you more bat or are you more cat? You know, what side of the fence are you going to lie on? And it's so integral to telling the story that really, while it's called Batman Catwoman so far, it's really Selena's story, because Batman's not even in a third of the book because he's dead.
Yeah.
So it's the art that he puts in the gutters. There's just everything is there for a reason. It feels like when Selena's cat is going around the apartment and, you know, kicks at the doormat and there's blood underneath it. Like, that's there to tell you something, that this isn't just some benevolent old man that she's visiting, that there's something way more.
Yeah, this is the damn aged devil here. And, you know, I think Mann is particularly skilled. I mean, he's a wonderful artist. I mean, really strong work in general. I feel like, and I would love, you know, I hope it'd be great to get him on for an interview. But it feels like when artists are paired with King, it feels like it's a high hurdle to cross. Because King's writing style is not, you know, okay, and then I want a panel of this and a panel of this, and here's the dialogue that's going to influence this. He has a very sort of, you know, not quite prose, somewhat poetry, dreamlike sort of, I'm not going to tell you with the words, I'm going to show you with the words, and then the artist has to rise to the occasion to make that work. I think King paired with the wrong artist could be a disaster, quite honestly. And that's not a slight against King. That's something that's true about the medium. And I think it really speaks to the quality of art when King's work hits. It's because he has a good partnership with the artist, and things can really take off. Eric, I wanted to ask what your take was. The narrative device through 3 issues, King's, I kind of give him a hard time, you know, not that he knows, he doesn't see our group text or my tweets, but I poke at King's writing style a little bit with like, oh, I wonder what nursery rhyme he's going to use as his narrative device on this issue, or wonder what song a character is going to sing throughout the whole thing. Well, this is all sort of almost in a long Halloween type feel, based around holidays, but not Halloween. This is a Christmas story in some ways that I think haven't yet to prove themselves out, or reveal themselves, I should say. What's your response been to the narrative structure around using traditional Christmas songs in each issue?
Uh, I think, I mean, they've aligned with what happens in the story. I will say that. I think that he picked very specific ones for a reason.
They don't feel random.
No, they don't feel random at all. So it very much aligned with the theme of what's happening in the story so far. And it's kind of cool to have that as a guide for someone like me, just reading the story. And like I said, as you know, I don't read comics all the time, so just having something there, kind of that's familiar. These songs that I've been singing since I'm a kid, it's kind of, it's there as a guide for me through the story. And I thought when you're reading it then, and then you're seeing the words, like the one, I think it's in the third book where the Joker's singing he's in jail and he's singing.
Yep.
He's singing.
Yep, it's book 3.
Right. So yeah, so like that.
Through the surveillance camera as he's like twirling around, and I think his preface, Javi, did I follow this correctly? I've read it a couple times. Eric, you feel free to answer too. Was that after Joker had basically turned himself in out of fear of the phantasm? That's
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, detective mode, man. You got to figure this stuff out as you go. Sorry, Eric, continue, please.
Well, no, it just, like I said, like that, him singing it and being in prison, it's very familiar. It just kept everything in a familiar place for me. So that it was brilliant, because especially, like I said, for someone like me who didn't know that great description that Javi had of everything this should have been connected to, it sounds like, but it's not.
Well, I think Christmas stories, the dichotomy of the bright, happy, joyous Christmas feeling with a dark, grim subject matter, really, I mean, King comes out and says it. This is a story about the end of things in a number of ways. Like, it's heavy, it's dark, and there's some gruesome stuff that happens here. And the juxtaposition is pretty nice. Javi, obviously King employed that same sort of trick often during his run on Batman. In particular, you had mentioned, the segment with Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne, Batman. I remember it felt like there was maybe 5 issues at one point where it was Batman or Bruce over the back of a horse with Thomas leading the horse, singing a song for like 5 stinking issues. It feels like he's doing it better here. And it's not that I didn't enjoy those. It feels like he's doing it better here. And I'm wondering, you've probably spent more time with these issues than Eric or I have. What do you think? One, is there the particular selection of each song for each issue? If you have any thoughts there, great. And what has, what does that evolution of King's use of his kind of favorite trick tell us about how he's grown the more time he's spent with them?
How spoilery do we want to get?
You know what? Let's do this. We've got, I think, my counter says we should probably start wrapping the conversation up in about 5 minutes. So let's say this last 5 minutes, listener, we're going to be all systems go. If you'd like to stop listening now, here's your chance. But we're gonna not hold anything back for these first 3 issues for the rest of the show, starting now.
I don't have really much of an insight for like the second issue, but the first being Silent Night. To me, that spoke to finding the Phantasm's son under the bridge in a tent, dead. Like it was quiet when he was found. It's what Phantasm is singing to herself at the end of the issue, and to me that tied in to her feelings on what's her son is now. He is forever in a silent night. And with the third issue, it was God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Well, merry can mean happy. Jokes make you laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Selina killed the Joker, and now he's at rest because he's dead.
Let nothing you dismay. There's not going to be anything that bothers you anymore. Your blood's been spilled all over your Florida beach house with a fingernail, man. That was something else.
That was.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into Clayman's art too. It's very, it's seductive and sultry when it needs to be. It's heroic
is it ever?
When it needs to be. If you look at like the shot of Batman and Catwoman standing over Gotham, or Batwoman and Commissioner Grayson looking out over the city. Like, these people are in like full on hero mode.
Yeah,
And with
Dick's
the
got a
Phantasm-
sweet looking beard too, man.
Yeah,
He drew
he
him
does.
with a heck of a beard.
And when it needs to be, it is flat out a horror comic.
Yes, it is.
The Joker image I mentioned of him in the safe when he decides he's going to kill Selena, and if the Joker wasn't horrific looking enough, half in makeup, Selena is actually more terrifying standing behind him with that weird expression on her face.
Dude, that was unnerving.
And once the Phantasm goes full Phantasm, like, she is straight out stalking her prey like in the movie. And the way that that man paces those, when she's going after the guy in the subway, there's this very, very, very faint skull in the back of a window. And as she comes down through the subway, getting closer and closer, it just looms.
Gleams, yeah.
Or my favorite in the third page, or the third issue, everyone's having a party in this big rooftop. The different apartments, we see everyone just having a good time. In the very corner bottom window, there's just a skull glowing in the darkness and a hand on the glass, and blood is everywhere. I mean, he's really good at setting a pace and tension as well.
Absolutely. He kind of just like, I think of it as, playing a stringed instrument and just like tuning it tighter and tighter and tighter. And the pitch goes up, the pitch goes up, the pitch goes up until it snaps. Right. And, the panel work, I think, is incredible because, as we mentioned, this is not a linear story. It's a huge part of what makes this book unique. But the way the panels sometimes are telling a story about a different timeline, but the underneath is not just blank white, comic book print paper. Underneath it all is like almost a one pager that the panels have been laid on top of. And that panel or the picture you're talking about, where in the bottom tiny right hand corner is that window with the light in the hand. You can miss that because you're looking at the panels, and I think in that case it's actually a different story or a different timeline. I might be misremembering that, but he does that a couple points where like the background that the panels are laid on top of are in one era, and the sort of active storytelling is in another. It's really pretty genius. I wanted to ask both of you guys for your thoughts on this as we kind of wrap up. And I wanted to save this for the spoiler section and while we're talking about art. We see characters at different points of their life. Obviously, we've let the cat out of the bag around Joker getting murdered. Or killed. Murder might be the wrong word, but it's murder. They're going to track it down like a murder.
Well,
whether he deserved to be murdered or not, that might not matter so much. She murdered the hell out of that dude. But I wanted to get your thoughts on Selena as an older Selena looks much different than an elderly Joker does. So elderly Joker is, frail. He is diseased looking. He is, sort of sick. He's wearing a bad wig at one point and big kind of phony glasses or whatever.
Yep.
And actually looks more frail than he does when he sort of loses the disguise a bit, and he kind of seems more visceral. Do you think the difference between a pretty healthy and somewhat youthful, 70-something-ish Selena, and the way the Joker was depicted, that felt like a choice to me? And I'm wondering, Javi, as you read the book, did that stand out to you? And if it did, what does that inform the reader? Or what could that be intentionally trying to inform the reader of how these characters are viewed, at least in this book?
I think it's down to the dichotomy of where they end up in their lives. While both have settled down and surprisingly had kids, picturing
Joker's
the Joker
got like a bunch of grandkids.
As a grandfather is
I know, it's
surreal.
I got to call the twins for their birthday. It's coming up.
But I mean, he is in some little mobile home park for seniors, with just his TV and to keep him company. And Selena's living in the mansion. Once Bruce dies, she says at the end of issue 3,
it's all hers.
She's the richest woman in the world now.
Yeah.
At this point. So she has every resource made available to her. So I'm sure, being with Bruce, she's got the best food, and they work out all the time because they seem to be still somewhat involved in nocturnal activities.
Yeah, those get illustrated from time to time. They seem like they were very active throughout
I was referring to crime fighting, but I guess the other thing too.
It works both ways, man. I think they call that a double entendre.
Yeah. So they're in very different stations at the end of their lives compared to where they started off, where they were both rising in the ranks of the Gotham underworld.
Absolutely. Eric, the one thought that came to my mind is, and this was more of a wonderance than anything else, in the earliest timeline, we see the sort of connection between Joker and Catwoman. They're not exactly teammates, but they're both on the wrong side of the law, and they're both kind of at odds with Batman. And Joker is sort of like pushing and prodding her to say, like, I know what you are. You're fun, right? You're not bad. You're a cat, right? And he clearly wants her to sort of remain, or he's at least toying with the ability to want it to, maybe he's getting some kicks out of tempting her to stay in that criminal life. And to me, I wondered, like, if she would have made that choice, when we look to the future, it's probably not this pretty healthy, 70-ish something Selena that's in good shape and with all her faculties. She might be in a worse spot than Joker is in his mobile home, just hanging out with a oscillating fan to keep him cool. Do you think that we are going to get any sort of like bombshell coming out of the death of that Joker in the trailer park? It feels like there might be just a crack of a door left open to say maybe that wasn't him. Am I reading into that too much? Or do you think there's something that could go on more as the series continues in the present day sort of future-most aspect of the storytelling?
I don't know. There's a small chance that that wasn't him. I mean, obviously it is the Joker, so it would be kind of going along with the character that he does things like this, or things like this always seem to happen with him. So there's a chance that I think it's still him, but I think the thing I pulled from them in their as the older Joker, Selena and Joker, the most was it kind of like the roles had shifted, right? Like she kind of now was the one in with the power. She was the one that was kind of enforcing her will into the situation, and she was the one in control. At least that's how
bloodthirsty as well, too. Really.
Right? Yeah, like she's. It seemed like she's been battered. And maybe these were things she always wanted to do, but didn't, right? And now she has this prime opportunity to a guy who always just did whatever the hell he wanted and killed it and did it in a fun way. So I think there might be something coming that we don't expect, just because, again, it is the Joker. I don't know if he'll be alive, or maybe the grandkids or something like something comes out there where they're now Joker type characters. I don't know, but it does leave the issue it does kind of leave you there, like wondering, okay, now what? Because the Joker is always usually involved, and now he's dead. So
they just reinforced it enough to really say, like, oh, the tests are there. It was him. Like anytime a book goes out of its way to reinforce something, it raises an eyebrow for me. So we'll see what happens. All I know is if the rest of these issues are anything like the first three, I'm really going to enjoy where they go.
King is the master of the bait and switch.
Yeah, man.
Of setting it up. So when he got his throat cut in the second issue, I didn't necessarily buy it that was, what really happened. I thought maybe he'd be alive still, but I saw I don't remember where I saw it, some speculation that the thing that King went to AT&T with, that they were going to have a hard time with. At first we thought it was the wedding. And then I assumed it was Alfred being killed because he's so essential. But then someone had mentioned that what they believed that he went to them with was killing off the Joker, that they wouldn't want to end that.
That would be something else.
So that, and with that combined with, all the facts and that Helena went down there, I think it's safe to say that I'm thinking that he is dead.
Well, it's a story about the end of things. That's
because
that's the piece that makes me.
What is the point of having a Joker without Batman? And now Batman's dead.
Right.
So the thing we're left with now is all these challenges that he's giving Selena. What is the thing he does that is so bad in the present?
Oh my gosh, the Andrea Beaumont. She was on her knees begging.
That she holds on to for decades.
All
that
these
she's
years.
Finally going to kill him over.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't gotten to that point yet. We're only a third of the way in, and we still haven't seen Bruce or Batman rather confront the Phantasm. We just now got Phantasm and Catwoman.
Right.
What did Catwoman do that she's on the list?
Javi, these guys have made fun of me for it publicly before. So maybe you've heard it on other episodes. But these guys know I'm a sensitive soul. Like, I don't like if it's too gruesome or like, it's just not my bag, man. It's not what I'm into.
Just really quick, it's funny you bring that up because the first BOF he was on, that Titan episode, was when Jason Todd goes crazy and starts killing everyone in the show. And that was the first one Garret was on.
Oh, like, I really don't like all this murder, guys. I'm kind of a softie on the inside. I don't know if you guys know this, but like, I am dreading to find out what Joker did. Like, that is so bad that Catwoman, who had no previous relationship with this character really before this story, begged Batman to let her kill him, and is held on to it. And she's like seeing Andrea there, or Andrea, I can't remember I need you to go watch Mask of Phantasm. Like, seeing her there, what you did to her, like, she's never let go of it over these years. I'm like, sheesh, don't draw it. I don't want to see it, man. It sounds twisted as hell. So anyway, guys, I love the conversation. We are bumping up against time here, and I the editor-in-chief runs a tight ship. He likes tight episodes. So we're going to start wrapping it up. Javi, any parting thoughts talking about issues 1 through 3?
I think we're just getting started. It's right now it's the Selena and Joker story. And I'm expecting a little bit of a shift as we get into the middle, with more of what the Phantasm is doing in Gotham. Well, I mean, we know that she's out for revenge, but really what happened, who her kid's father is.
Yeah,
there's a
we
whole
didn't
lot
even
of
touch on
that we have not even touched the surface of yet. And while King is definitely taking his time, I don't feel like it's too decompressed or that I'm not getting my money's worth out of reading an issue.
I agree entirely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining. It was a really fun conversation. I haven't actually, for some reason, been able to get into a discussion on this one as much as some other, comics that I've read. So I was looking forward to covering this. Batman, Catwoman, issues 1 through 3, available now, not on the DC Universe Infinite app to this
6
point.
months, I think.
Yep, 6 months, but you can grab them on Comixology if you don't have a local comic book shop to get the physical copies from. All right, guys. Well, it was a fun episode. Javi, first time on the show. Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Oh, it was awesome. It was so much fun.
Well, we're going to get you back. Maybe we do this for sure, a quarterly kind of catch up through the year on this title. And I know you got some toy stuff that you and I were talking about covering too at some point. So we'll have you back on.
Yeah, I would love to be back.
Anything to plug for the listeners before we part ways?
No, just head on over to Batman on Film. I am currently talking Batman Catwoman, obviously, and halfway through now, Batman Black and White.
Oh yeah,
and maybe something super coming in the middle of the year that I might be writing about. We'll see.
Oh well, yeah, you have my. I was going to say spider sense, but we already talked about the rivalry, so I won't dip back into that. You have my curiosity, my good sir. Well, thank you once again for joining. It was awesome to have you on.
Thank you.
Eric, buddy, always a pleasure to record with you. Not our first rodeo, so you don't have to tell me if it was good for you or not. You mentioned the podcast.
Yes.
Give the people the details on that and anything else you'd like to share for us, my good sir.
All right, you could check out Straight Outta Gotham with me and another Batman on Film contributor, Peter Vera. We do a show weekly. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, anywhere you podcast, we're pretty much there. So you just search for Straight Outta Gotham, you can find us there. We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group. If you guys want to interact with us, hit us up there. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Finally33, spell Finale33. I will also be appearing on the Batman Book Club, recording tomorrow again with Pete Vera on Future State. We're doing the second round of Future State. So if you guys are interested in Future State, want to hear our thoughts on it, it's all the Gotham titles. So Batman stuff and any other Gotham City title that's out there.
Which, in my opinion, have been the best of Future State.
Yeah, they have been.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So yeah. And Garrett, we need to get you back on. You haven't been on Straight Outta Gotham in a long time, so we have to get you.
I was gonna say, man, where's my
Javi too,
invite?
man. We need to get you on. We need to get you guys on. If you, Javi, we could do other things on Straight Outta Gotham. So if you want to do James Bond, I love James Bond. We can do that as well.
We can do that. We can talk The Flash.
I'm completely open.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yes.
The other shows are not. You can get a little kind of choose your own adventure, right? I'll have to think of, we've toyed around with the satellite show topics forever, on Batman on Film, but Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. Maybe we should just do those on some of the podcasts you guys have. Keep this feedback focused. We'll put a poll up. We'll put a poll up.
I'll just say one thing. Bill has been talking about doing a cooking show for the longest time.
That's very true. That's very true.
So maybe we'll get a BOF cooking show coming sometime soon.
He shared his Tex-Mex lasagna recipe with me.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
I make it like at least every 2 weeks.
I'm gonna have to check that out. All right, guys. Thank you once again. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. This is honestly one of the highlights of my week. And thank you for those of you that have reached out with feedback. I would love it if you would rate and review the podcast. If you do, I'm going to read it on air. Even if it's not that nice, I'll still read it on air. I've got a sense of humor, but hopefully you're enjoying it all. And if there's anything you'd like to hear about on the show, email me at garret.grev@batmanonfilm.com. That is Garret, GARRET, GREV, @batmanonfilm.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I am at Garret Wado. And remember, dear listeners, it's not who you are underneath, but it's what you do that defines you. Thank you for listening.
You have been listening to the official podcast of the one and only Batman on Film website. On Twitter, follow BOF at Batman on Film and the Batman Podcast Network at BatPod Network. For Jet and everyone at Batman on Film, I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening to the authoritative, definitive, the original Batman on Film.